What do historians say about Jesus? Historians often rely on the testimony of other historians. Historians who lived before them and who are in a good position to know the facts. Okay? So, Gaius Suetonius Tranquillus is a Roman historian. His famous work is about the most important Roman emperors. Okay? And much that we know of the Roman world and the lives of the Caesars, their exploits, comes from the writings of this Roman historian. He has a small reference to Jesus because the Jews at Rome caused continuous disturbances at the instigation of Christus. He, meaning Emperor Claudius, expelled them from the city. Okay? Of course, we are not saying that what he says is the truth. All right? But what we are saying is, he does make a reference to a person. A person who is a Jew. Christus is not a Jewish name. This is how a man living decades after Christ and writing over a century after him, this is what he saw and understood. There was a Jew whose name was Christ. He has not understood the difference between Jews and Christians. To him, they are all the same. And at his instigation, he felt that the Jews had created a lot of problems for the Romans, and for which Claudius expelled them from Rome. We find an echo of it in the Bible. We read in the book of Acts that Claudius had expelled all the Jews, because even Roman emperors at that time really did not know that Christians were not Jews. Okay? So they thought Christianity was a sect within the Jewish community. So Claudius was upset at the riots of the Jews because of this issue of Christianity. He expelled them from Rome, and that's how Paul met his long-time gospel partners, Aquila and Priscilla. Okay? Because they had been expelled from Rome as well. Okay? That's how he met them. So, there is a reference to Christ. So we know Jesus was no myth. He was a real person. But we know nothing more about him from the writings of Suetonius. So let's move on. This is another Roman writer. His name is Lucian. He was not a historian, but he wrote a lot. He wrote plays, he wrote satires. And this is what he mentions about Jesus. He says they are first legislator, meaning the first legislator of the Christians. Okay? They are lawgiver. Who convinced them that once they have transgressed by denying the Greek gods, then they are all brothers of one another, have thrown over the gods of Greece, instead worshipping the crucified sophist himself. Sophist is a philosopher. Okay? That crucified philosopher himself, living under his laws. They revered him as a god. Next, after that, okay, it's not in smooth English because it's Latin translated kind of word for word. Okay? So, next, after that, other whom they still worship, the man crucified in Palestine because he introduced this new cult into the world. Okay? So, from the writings of Lucian, we get to know a little more about the historical Jesus. Okay? What do we know from this? his followers, they denied the gods others were worshipping. They had rejected the Greek gods. Instead, they were worshipping him as God. Then, he had been crucified. Okay, so he was a real man who had been crucified. Okay, then they regarded each other as brothers. Little bit we know about Jesus from here, and those of us who have read the accounts in the New Testament see a bit of a match over here. All right, so Jesus was a real flesh and blood person about whom Roman historians, writing some decades after him, they write about him. Okay, Pliny the Second, as he is called, is one of the most famous Roman historians. In fact, one of the most famous historians the world over. Okay? He lived from AD 61. You must have noticed all the three historians, all the three persons whom we have quoted lived some decades after Christ. Pliny the Second, like Suetonius, was no ordinary Roman. Suetonius was a governor. Pliny also was a Roman governor. He was a very prominent man. And history was his hobby. He liked to study the past and to write about it, especially about the glorious Roman Empire, okay, which they considered as the most glorious empire on earth, okay, that ever was or ever could be. So he wrote a lot about Rome. But he also wrote about his own struggles as a governor. He had been instructed by the Roman emperor to kill anyone who called himself a Christian. Okay? So Pliny writes to the emperor asking for advice. Should I kill all Christians or should I kill only some of them? And then he goes on to say how he had managed to get some of them to curse Christ and even to worship the Roman emperor's idol. So shouldn't we spare such Christians? They're not really Christians at all. So shouldn't I restrict myself to killing those who refuse to burn incense to Caesar and refuse to renounce Christ? Is his question. Okay? To which the emperor responded saying, you shouldn't go on a witch hunt, I mean, don't go around catching people and making them bow before the emperor's idol, and then if they don't have them, no. Okay? Just leave Christians alone. But if someone comes to you with another person saying, this person is a Christian, then you investigate him. And if he really is, don't spare him. Kill him. Okay? That's what the emperor writes to him. Okay? So this is part of his letter. They asserted, however, that the sum and substance of their fault or error had been that they were accustomed to meet on a fixed day before dawn. Okay? This gives us some idea of what early church meetings were like. They met before dawn, on a fixed day before dawn, and sing responsively a hymn to Christ as to a God, and to bind themselves by oath not to some crime, but not to commit fraud, theft, or adultery, not falsify their trust, nor refuse to return a trust when called upon to do so. When this was over, it was their custom to depart and to assemble again to partake of food, but ordinary and innocent food. You know why he mentions this ordinary and innocent food? Because Christians had been accused of cannibalism. The breaking of bread. So Romans thought they were actually eating the flesh of a human being and drinking his blood. Okay, so 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 he says, no, they eat ordinary and innocent food. Even this they affirmed they had ceased to do after my edict, by which, in accordance with your instructions, I had forbidden political associations. Accordingly, I judged it all the more necessary to find out what the truth was by torturing 2 female slaves who were called deaconesses. But I discovered nothing else but depraved, excessive superstition. Okay. To the Romans, this was superstition because they looked down on Christians. They said, these guys are worshipping a human being. No, they're not like us, worshipping the gods. They're worshipping a human being. So they considered it a depraved superstition. Those who denied that they were or had been Christians, when they invoked the gods in words dictated by me, offered prayer with incense and wine to your image, which I had ordered to be brought for this purpose, together with the statues of the gods, and moreover, curse Christ. None of which those who are really Christians, it is said, can be forced to do. These, I thought, should be discharged. Okay? Well, we move on to another very prominent Roman historian, also a governor, a military general, a very learned man, and wrote a lot about Roman history. So Cornelius Tacitus, he wrote the Annals of Imperial Rome. He was another Roman historian to whom Rome was glorious beyond all description. You cannot have an empire exceed Rome in glory. That was his opinion. And, he writes about Nero. It was when Nero was emperor that both Peter and Paul were martyred. Okay? So, he writes about Nero's rule. Rome had caught fire during Nero's reign. It was believed that the fire was started by Nero himself. Okay? The reason was all his predecessors, they had built up Rome. But now there was nothing to build. Rome was entirely built and he wanted to build. There wasn't anything to build. So he decided to set it on fire and then start again. Okay? So Rome was destroyed in the Great Fire. Then rumors started flying. Some of the senators openly accused him of having caused the fire. He tried to deflect this by offering sacrifices to placate all the Roman gods. And then, when he saw people were still accusing him of having started the fire, he decided to blame the Christians for the fire and to have them tortured and executed. Okay? Consequently, to get rid of the report, Nero fastened the guilt and inflicted the most exquisite tortures on a class hated for their abominations. Okay? That's how the Romans viewed them. Called Christians by the populace. Christus, from whom the name had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius. Okay? So now we are getting more facts. Jesus was around when Tiberius was the Caesar at the hands of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilate. And a most mischievous superstition, thus checked for the moment, again broke out, not only in Judea, the first source of the evil, but even in Rome, where all things hideous and shameful from every part of the world find their center and become popular, including Christianity. Okay? So, all these are, how Romans saw Christians. Gross. Superstitious. They worshipped a human being. And that human being had been put to death when Pontius Pilate was the procurator. After his capture, he switched sides. He became a great friend of Roman governors and emperors who valued his friendship because of his vast knowledge and wisdom. Then he became a Roman historian, writing Roman history. So he, writing about the first half of the first century, when he writes the Antiquities of the Jews, the picture there is Josephus, and this is Josephus. This is Josephus as a Jew. That's Josephus after he became a friend of the Romans. Now there arose at this time a source of further trouble in one Jesus. Okay? So here is a very clear reference to a near, from a near contemporary of Jesus. He was a wise man who performed surprising works. A teacher of men who gladly welcomed strange things. He led away many Jews and also many of the Gentiles. He was the so-called Christ. Okay. When Pilate, acting on information supplied by the chief men around us, condemned him to the cross, those who had attached themselves to him at first did not cease to cause trouble. And the tribe of Christians, which has taken this name from him, is not extinct even today. Okay, so there's a reference again to Jesus. Wise man, that was the Jewish equivalent of the sophist, a philosopher. But then he also mentions he performed surprising works, that he was a teacher who had followers among Jews and among Gentiles. Then Pilate condemned him to the cross, and he died crucified. Then, so he assembled the Sanhedrin of judges. This is a later reference. So he assembled the Sanhedrin of judges, brought before them the brother of Jesus, who was called Christ, whose name was James, and some others. And when he had formed an accusation against them as breakers of the law, he delivered them to be stoned. This is not the James who was beheaded in the book of Acts. This is James, the brother of Jesus. So Josephus writes about his execution. So is Jesus a historical person? Yes. So there are people who think of him as a myth, but no, he's a real historical person. This is Mara Bar Serapion. We know almost nothing about him except scraps of his writings that have survived. He was a Samaritan. From his writings, it seems he was a philosopher of sorts. And he was executed for his views. And before his execution, he writes to his son and then says, what advantage did the Jews gain from executing their wise king? Who is he talking about? Jesus. It was just after that their kingdom was abolished. God justly avenged their wrong. He actually is writing about, Socrates, his death, and so on. Some prominent philosophers who died. Then he talks about Jesus. And he implies that his enemies will not get away with what they are doing to him. They'll kill him, but they'll suffer for it, is what he writes to his son. These are the Jewish Talmuds. Many of these were written by people in the decades that followed Jesus' life. Some of them were written by people who were his contemporary. And one of the Talmuds has a clear reference to him. On Sabbath Eve and the eve of Passover, Jesus the Nazarene was hanged. In India, when we use the word hanged, we normally mean a noose. Okay? But that's not what the Jews meant by hanging. The Jews had in their language no word for crucifixion. We also use the word hang like we hang pictures on wall. Okay? So, he was hanged, and a herald went forth before him, 40 days heralding, Jesus the Nazarene is going forth to be stoned because he practiced sorcery and instigated and seduced Israel to idolatry. Whoever knows anything in defense may come and state it. But since they did not find anything in his defense, they hanged him on the Sabbath eve and the eve of Passover. Okay? So, what was the accusation against Jesus? There's an accusation of sorcery, which implies he performed miracles, but the Jews did not agree that the miracles were done by God. They thought he was doing them with the help of evil spirits. Okay, so he was accused of sorcery. Now, we don't find this in the Bible. This is in the Jewish Talmuds. Says for 40 days before the Passover, a man went around announcing in Israel that he was going to be stoned to death for sorcery. If anyone wants to come and speak in his defense, do it. But no one came and spoke in his defense. Okay? But though they planned to stone him, they actually crucified him. Okay? So the Jewish Talmuds have a clear reference to Jesus. They also refer to he seduced Israel to idolatry. None of the Roman writers say this. So what idolatry is this? This is about Jesus asking people to worship him. His claim to deity. Well, so we have the Jewish Talmuds, we have Suetonius, we have Pliny there, Lucian there, Josephus here, okay? What they have written, how reliable a picture of Jesus can you draw from their writings? Okay? Remember what we had said? What does the judge ask himself? And what does the historian ask himself? Is the witness competent? Is he reliable? Can the testimony be corroborated? Okay? And were they competent? Most of them never met Jesus. They lived decades after. So they had to rely on second-hand, third-hand information. Okay? Were they reliable? As Romans, they were deeply prejudiced against the Jews. They despised them. Can their testimony be corroborated? In some ways, yes, but in many ways, no, as we shall see.